The accusation landed before I understood the words. Chief Archivist Bain's finger was already jabbing toward my chest, and the widow's eye, the Van Tane sapphire, the largest stone in the Crown Vault, the one I had personally logged into the ledger 4 days prior, was gone from its case, and 40 people in the Hall of Ledgers had gone silent enough to hear the case's velvet lining settle. She was the last hand on the log, Bain said, loud enough to carry to the gallery. The last hand on the case. Ask her where it went. My name is Wren Calloway. I was 24 years old, unpresented until I was 19, because my body had been too busy surviving to bother declaring itself, and when the scent glands finally opened, they opened Omega, which in the Hall of Ledgers made me a curiosity first and a liability second, and as of that morning, a thief third. I had been counting coin returns since 6. My fingers were still stained with the graphite of the morning's reconciliations. I had not touched the widow's eye since the day I logged its weight, its facets, its provenance, in handwriting so careful my father would have been proud of it if my father had lived long enough to see me hold a post like this one. A ledger that lies once will lie forever, he used to say, sliding his own books across the kitchen table for me to check while my mother worked the night shift. Keep your straight, Wren, and nobody can ever put a hand on you. He had been wrong about that, as it turned out. A ledger could be perfectly straight, and a hand could still close around your throat. The guards had already started toward me, not roughly, not yet, but with the particular unhurried certainty of men who believed the outcome was decided, when the doors at the far end of the hall opened without a knock. The way doors only open for one person in the entire Van Tane court. Queen Roswen came through them the way winter comes through a cracked window, quietly, and then all at once. The court called her the Vault Queen, not for the treasury she guarded, but for the 7 years since her mother's death, in which no one, not a counselor, not a lover, not the wolfhound, who never left her heel, had ever seen the door of her behind fully open. She wore black, as she always did for audit days, and she scented of bergamot smoke and cold iron even from 30 feet, a signature so distinct that new clerks were warned about it before they were warned about anything else in the palace. Beside her, a gray shape uncoiled itself from the shadow of her cloak. Thistle, the queen's wolfhound, taller at the shoulder than most of the guards' hips, bonded to her since she was 16, and famous, infamous, for tolerating exactly one person in the world. Explain, the queen said. Not to me, to Bain. One word, flat as a closed ledger, Bain explained, at length, with the relish of a man who had never once in 11 years checked my sums and was delighted to finally have something to say about me. The case unlatched by my key at closing, the stone gone by opening, the discrepancy sheet. My discrepancy sheet, the one I had flagged 3 separate times over the past month about numbers that would not sit still in the Crown accounts, reframed, in his telling, as evidence that I had been planning my exit for weeks. I said nothing. There is a particular kind of silence that comes from being poor and unpresented and orphaned in a room full of people who have decided what you are before you open your mouth, and I had worn that silence like a coat for most of my life. I straightened the stack of ledgers in front of me instead, squared their corners, because my hands needed something true to do, while the rest of the room decided I was a liar. That was when Thistle crossed the hall. She did not trot. She did not sniff the air the way dogs do in stories. She walked the way the queen walked, unhurried and absolute, past 4 guards and the chancellor's polished boots and Bain's still jabbing finger, and she sat down on my feet, the full considerable weight of her, and leaned her skull against my hip, and looked up at the queen with an expression that on a human face would have been called defiance. The hall went from silent to very silent. "Thistle doesn't do that," someone breathed, somewhere in the gallery, and they were right. In 7 years, the wolfhound had never once chosen a lap that wasn't the queen's, had bitten 2 ambassadors, and a suitor for lesser offenses than reaching too fast for a chair. And now she sat on the boots of a girl the whole room had just decided was a thief, immovable as the stone she was supposedly guilty of stealing. The queen's gaze came to me for the first time. I felt it the way you feel weather changing, a pressure behind the eyes before the storm arrives. "Your name," she said. "Wren Calloway, Your Majesty." My voice came out steadier than I expected. I did not look away, because looking away, in my experience, was what guilty people did, and I had promised myself years ago that I would never again look like something I wasn't just to make the room comfortable. The queen looked down at the dog refusing to move off my feet, and something crossed her face too briefly to name. Not doubt, not yet, but the first crack in a door that had been shut for 7 years. "Take her to the West Study," she said to the guards. "Not the cells. The dog is not going to allow the cells, and I am not in the habit of fighting my own hound in front of the court." A beat. "Bring the ledgers. All of them." Bain started to protest that this was irregular, that the law requires evidence, the queen said, without raising her voice, which was somehow worse than if she had shouted. "I have a missing stone and a dog. Get me evidence, Chief Archivist, or get out of my hall." He got out of the way instead. I was marched from the Hall of Ledgers with 40 pairs of eyes on my back and a wolfhound pressed to my thigh the entire way, and somewhere behind the pressure of the accusation, underneath the fear, a small, cold clerk's voice in the back of my mind was already doing what it always did when the world stopped making sense. It was already counting. The West Study was smaller than I expected for a room in a queen's private wing, lined floor to ceiling with the crown's true accounts, not the public ledgers copied for the archive, but the working originals. Ink blotted and dog-eared and honest in the way only a document nobody expects to be read ever is. Someone had built a fire. Someone had not, apparently, told the fire to be less generous, because the room was warm enough that I stopped shivering within minutes, which felt like its own small mercy. They set the discrepancy ledgers in front of me, 6 months of the Crown's treasury accounts, the ones I had flagged 3 times to a supervisor who had filed my notes and done nothing. And the queen sat across the table with her hands folded and Thistle stretched across both our feet like a drawn bolt, and said, "Walk me through it. Not confess, not explain yourself. Walk me through it, the way you'd ask a builder to walk you through a wall she suspected was load-bearing." So I did. I told her about the coin returns that didn't square in March. I told her about the shipping manifest for the Southern Tithe that listed 11 crates and unloaded 10, and the 11th crate's value quietly folded into handling loss 3 ledgers later, in a hand that wasn't mine and wasn't Bain's either. I told her that the Widow's Eyes case had been rekeyed 8 days ago, not 4, not by me, by a locksmith requisition that had gone through the Chancellor's office and never through the archive at all, which was procedurally impossible unless someone with authority above the archive had wanted it that way. "You noticed all of this," the Queen said. Not a question. Her eyes had not left the discrepancy sheet in front of her, or perhaps they had not left me. It was hard, in that light, to be certain which. "It's the one thing I've always been good at," I said, "finding where the numbers stop agreeing." My father taught me to read a ledger before he taught me to read a book. He used to say a page of lies always has a seam in it somewhere, if you're patient enough to find the thread and pull. Something in her face moved at that, not softened, exactly, recalibrated. She turned the iron ring on her smallest finger once, a small, tight revolution, the kind of gesture a person makes without noticing they're making it. My mother used to say something similar, she said, and then, as if she'd surprised herself by saying it aloud, closed the subject as neatly as a ledger cover. Chief Archivist Bain filed 3 notes from you on this account, and did nothing. Yes, Your Majesty. Why? I could have said something safe. I had spent 5 years in that archive learning exactly how much truth a room like that one could bear before it turned on you. But the dog was warm against my ankle, and the fire was warm at my back, and something about being formally accused of the one thing I had never in my life done had burned away my patience for careful answers. Because I'm an Omega with no family name and no coin to buy a better post, I said, and it's easier to believe a girl like that stole a stone than to believe a man with a seal ring ignored a warning 3 times. The Queen was quiet long enough that I thought I'd overstepped badly enough to undo whatever the dog had bought me. Then she reached down, not to me, to Thistle, and rested 2 fingers against the wolfhound's skull, a habitual, absent touch. She has taken 3 months to accept a new groom into the kennel, the Queen said to the dog as much as to me. She bit the Duke of Pharaoh's cousin for standing too close to my chair, and she sat on your feet inside of 30 seconds. She looked up. Her eyes, I noticed for the first time, were the pale gray of a sky before snow. I do not trust easily, Miss Calloway. I have found, over time, that it is rarely wise, but I have also never known this animal to be wrong about a person, and she has just called you honest in front of my entire court. What does that mean for me, Your Majesty? It means, the Queen said, rising, the fire throwing her shadow long across the discrepancy sheets, that you are not going to the cells tonight. You are going to help me find out who actually took my mother's stone, because whoever falsified that requisition wanted you blamed specifically, and I do not believe in coincidences inside my own vault. She scented, up close, exactly the way the court warned new clerks she would, bergamot smoke, cold iron beneath it, something that made the small hairs at the back of my neck rise the way weather does before a change in pressure. I caught, underneath my own fear, the specific indignity of noticing that I liked it. You will work from these rooms, she said. You will not be alone. Thistle has apparently made that decision for both of us. A pause, the barest dry edge entering her voice for the first time. I hope you like dogs, Miss Calloway. I don't believe either of us has much say in the matter anymore. I was given a room 3 doors down from the Queen's own apartments, in a wing of the palace I had previously only seen from the outside, walking the servants' path at dawn with my collar up against the cold. Mistress Pharaoh, the steward of the private wing, delivered me there herself, with the particular flat courtesy of a woman reserving judgment until the facts came in. Her Majesty says, "You're to have what you need," Pharaoh said, setting down a tray. Within reason. She looked at the plain wool of my dress, my chapped hands, the ink stains I hadn't managed to scrub off in 5 years of trying, and something in her face gentled by a fraction. Eat something. You look like you haven't in a while. I hadn't, not properly, not since the accusation had emptied my stomach out along with my dignity. The tray held bread and a good cheese and, absurdly, a small pot of chamomile with a jar of honey beside it, the kind of thing I hadn't tasted since I was small enough to sit on my grandmother's counter and watch her stir it, before the money ran out for anything sweeter than the tea itself. I hadn't mentioned chamomile to anyone in this palace. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone at all, not since my father died and honey became a thing other people's kitchens had. I decided it was coincidence. It felt safer than the alternative. Thistle had followed me the entire way and did not leave when Pharaoh did. She circled twice in front of the hearth and dropped with a sound like a felled sack of grain, and I sat on the edge of an unfamiliar bed in an unfamiliar wing with a queen's dog snoring at my feet, and understood, distantly, that my life had turned a corner I had no map for. The wealth of the private wing announced itself in textures, not words. The floor beneath my worn boots was some pale stone veined like marble but warmer, heated from below by some mechanism I didn't understand. The door hinges made no sound at all, which told me more about the household budget than any inventory could have. The servants who passed me in the corridor over the following days did not sneer, exactly. They performed a more elegant cruelty, the careful blankness of people who had been told to be civil and had decided civility could stop at the exact letter of the instruction. Lady Sphyrine Colt found me on the third morning in the small solar where I'd been given a table to continue the audit. She was beautiful in the practiced, structural way of women who had been groomed since birth for exactly this: court consort seats, the careful architecture of belonging. She smelled of orange oil and something sharper beneath it, and she smiled at me the way a cat regards something that has wandered too close to its bowl. "The little clerk who charmed the dog," she said, settling into the chair across from me without being asked. How resourceful. "I didn't charm anything, my lady." She sat down. Sphyrine turned one of my ledger pages with a single manicured finger, not reading it, simply asserting that she could. "Roswin has never let a servant work from this wing. Do you know that? 7 years I've been coming to this palace, and I have never once been given a room past the second gallery." Her eyes came up, pleasant, precise. "You should enjoy it while it lasts. Her Majesty's charity has a short season." "This isn't charity," I said. "It's an investigation." "Of course it is." She rose, smoothing skirts that cost more than I'd earned in 3 years. At the door she paused, and her voice dropped into something almost kind, which was somehow more unsettling than the condescension had been. A word of advice, Miss Calloway, from someone who has watched that woman since she was a girl guarding her mother's coffin like it might get up and walk. She does not keep things. She keeps score. Don't mistake the difference for warmth. She left a faint sourness behind her that had nothing to do with the orange oil, and I sat very still for a long moment afterward, my thumb pressed to the pad of my first finger the way it did when I was calculating something too large to hold all at once. I found the Queen in the study that evening, going through the shipping manifests herself, sleeves pushed to the elbow, ink on the side of one hand in a smear that made her look, briefly, less like a monarch and more like a woman who had also once been a girl doing her father's, her mother's, sums at a kitchen table. "Lady Colt visited me today," I said, because I had decided somewhere in the last hour that pretending otherwise would only give the lie more room to grow. She seemed to think I should be grateful and brief about it. The Queen did not look up from the manifest. "Sphyrine has opinions about most things that involve my attention going somewhere she isn't." A pause, precise as a ledger line. "Ignore her. She said you keep score instead of keeping things." That made the Queen's pen stop. She set it down, carefully, too carefully, the way a person sets down something breakable when they'd rather have thrown it, and looked at me across the table, the firelight doing complicated things to the pale gray of her eyes. "She isn't entirely wrong," the Queen said. "I have found scores easier to trust than sentiment. Scores don't lie to your face and smile while they do it." Something shifted in her voice, quieter, "But I don't believe I've kept score on you, Miss Calloway." "Not yet." "What have you kept then?" She didn't answer that directly. Instead, she reached across the table and turned my discrepancy sheet toward her, the one I'd built that afternoon cross, referencing the requisition seals, and her fingers, ink-stained, deliberate, came to rest an inch from mine on the page. Neither of us moved for a long moment. I could smell bergamot and iron close enough to taste it, and beneath my own fear, something else entirely, warm and unfamiliar, and a little frightening in how much I wanted to lean into it. Whoever built this fraud, she said finally, withdrawing her hand, was careful. That worries me more than the theft itself. Careful men don't stop at one stone. She was right to worry. The next seal I traced, 2 nights later, belonged to the Chancellor's own office. I did not sleep well after that discovery, and I doubt the Queen did either, though neither of us said so aloud. I found her the following dawn in the small solar, with the Chancellor's requisition open in front of her, Thistle's head in her lap, and an expression on her face I hadn't seen there before. Not the flat control of the Hall of Ledgers, but something rawer, closer to the surface, like a wound reopened by an old familiar hand. You should know why this frightens me more than it should, she said, without preamble, before I had even set down my tray. My mother died because of a ledger like this one. Falsified entries, a door left open in the accounts long enough for someone to walk an assassin's coin straight through the vault gate. I was 16. I found her myself, in the room 2 doors from this one. Her fingers found the iron ring, turned it once. My uncle raised me on one lesson after that. Trust is a door. Every door left open is eventually walked through by someone who means you harm. I have kept every door in this palace shut for 7 years because of that lesson, Miss Calloway, and I am beginning to suspect I shut the wrong ones. I did not know what to say to that kind of grief laid so plainly on a table between us, so I did the only true thing I had. I told her about my own father, the accountant who'd trusted his partner with the family's savings, who'd been swindled so thoroughly that we lost the house, the good years, everything but his conviction that honest numbers were the one thing nobody could steal from you if you kept them straight enough. He died believing that, I said. I've spent my whole life trying to prove he wasn't a fool for it. He wasn't, the Queen said, quietly, and for a moment the distance between a queen and a clerk narrowed to almost nothing at all. It was Chancellor Voss who broke it. He arrived that same afternoon, unannounced, all silk and affronted dignity, with Bane trailing a half step behind him like a man who had learned exactly which way the wind was about to blow and had decided, wrongly, which side to stand on. Your Majesty, Voss said, bowing with just enough delay to register as insolence, I understand the girl has been given rooms in your own wing. I must say, for the sake of the crown's dignity, this is unusual, the Queen said. Yes, so is a locksmith requisition run through your office 8 days before a theft, Chancellor, with no record of it in the archive's log. Care to explain that, or shall I? The silence that followed had teeth in it. Voss recovered fast. He was good at recovering. I would learn later, good in the specific practiced way of a man who has been lying successfully for a very long time, and produced, with a magician's flourish, an explanation about routine maintenance, an oversight in filing, a clerk's error he would personally see corrected. See that you do, the Queen said, and let him go, and I watched her watch his back retreat down the corridor with an expression I was beginning to learn meant she had already decided something and simply hadn't said it aloud yet. You don't believe him, I said, once the doors had closed. I don't believe anyone who explains too quickly, she said. Guilty men rehearse. Innocent men are only ever confused. She looked at me, and something in her face had hardened back into the Vault Queen's careful mask, though her voice, when it came, was gentler than the look. Be careful around him, Wren. I mean that. It was the first time she had used my given name. I noticed. I suspect she did too, from the way she turned immediately back to the manifests, as if the word had cost her something she hadn't meant to spend. Voss did not wait long to spend something of his own. 4 nights later, while I was walking the servant's stair back from the archive with the last of the season's tithe records under my arm. He was waiting in the shadow of the landing, alone, without Bane this time, which told me he had come to say something he didn't want witnessed. "You are a resourceful little thing," he said, in the tone men like him use for compliments that are actually warnings. "Clever enough to find seams in 6 months of accounts. Clever enough, I'd have thought. To know when to stop pulling threads that don't belong to you. I only pull the ones that don't sit straight, my lord. How admirable." He stepped closer, and up close he smelled of old paper and something cloying beneath it, cologne applied to cover something less pleasant. "The Queen's charity is a season, Miss Calloway, not a career. When it ends, and it will end, they always do, you will still be a gutter snipe, with no family name in a palace full of people who remember exactly what you were accused of, whatever gets said about who did it. I would think carefully, if I were you, about which version of this story leaves you employed anywhere at all." He left before I could answer, which was its own kind of answer. I stood on the landing a long moment, tithe records clutched to my chest, my thumb pressed hard against the pad of my finger, counting the number of days since the theft, the number of exits from that stairwell, the number of ways a man that frightened of a clerk's arithmetic might be frightened of what the arithmetic would eventually prove. I did not tell the Queen about the threat that night. I told her the next morning. Over the tea, Pharaoh had started leaving for both of us without being asked, because I had decided somewhere on that landing that keeping my own ledger straight meant this too. No omissions, no folding an inconvenient entry into someone else's handling loss. She went very still when I finished. Not the controlled stillness of the Hall of Ledgers, something with more heat underneath it. "He threatened you," she said. "He warned me. There's a difference, technically. Not to me, there isn't." She stood, and for a moment I thought she meant to go find Voss herself, crown or no crown, ledger or no ledger. Then she stopped, visibly reeling something back in, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped into something quieter and far more dangerous than anger. "I do not lose what's mine twice, Wren. I lost my mother to a man exactly like him, patient and careful, and certain no one would ever add the numbers correctly. I am not going to lose anyone else that way. Do you understand me?" I understood the words. I did not yet fully understand what she meant by mine, though something in my chest turned over at the sound of it anyway, warm and unwise. I did not have long to consider it. 2 days later, the discrepancy I had been chasing through the Southern tithe accounts finally resolved into a shape I recognized, and the shape had Voss's seal pressed into every seam of it. And by nightfall the shape had also, somehow, resolved into a second sapphire, a paste replica, badly cut, found wrapped in a servant's shawl at the bottom of my traveling trunk, discovered during a routine inspection that Bane himself had ordered while I was at supper. I had never owned that shawl in my life. It did not matter. By the time I reached my room, guards were already waiting, and Bane was already smiling the particular smile of a man who has found a way to make his own negligence someone else's crime, and the Queen was nowhere in sight. Summoned, I would learn later, to a council session Voss had convened specifically to keep her occupied while the trap was sprung. They did not take me to the cells gently this time. Thistle fought them the entire way down the stair, snarling, snapping at a guard's sleeve until 2 more men were called to hold her back by the collar, and the sound she made as they finally forced her off, a long, raw, grieving howl that followed me down 3 flights of stone, was the worst sound I had heard in my life, worse than the accusation in the Hall of Ledgers. Worse than Voss's whisper on the landing, because it meant that even the one creature in this palace who had chosen me without hesitation could not, this time, save me from what was coming. The dungeon beneath the Vault Queen's palace was not the medieval horror the stories in the servants' hall like to describe, but it was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature, and it was quiet in the specific hollow way of a place built to make you feel forgotten. I sat on the stone bench with my knees drawn up and did the only thing I knew how to do with fear. I counted. The seams in the stone, the drips from somewhere unseen. The hours, though I had no clock, only the guard's rotation and the particular ache of a body that had not eaten since supper. Thistle came back near midnight. I heard her before I saw her, claws on stone, a low, ceaseless whine, and then she was there at the bars, pressed as close to them as her shoulders allowed, and no guard tried to move her again. I put my hand through the gap, and she leaned into it with her whole weight, and I cried for the first time since the Hall of Ledgers, quietly, into fur that smelled of wood smoke and rain. The queen came an hour after that, alone, no guard at her back. A storm outside loud enough that I heard it through however many feet of stone stood between the dungeon and the sky. She had changed out of the council session's formal black into something simpler, and her hair had come half loose from its pins. And she looked, in the low torchlight, less like the Vault Queen, and more like a woman who had been arguing with someone for hours and had lost none of the argument's heat. I called an emergency session the moment I heard, she said, without preamble, crouching outside the bars near Thistle. Voss produced a warrant faster than any warrant has ever been produced in this palace's history. That alone tells me everything. Her hand found the dog's back, and through the dog I understood later some part of her found me. I am going to get you out of here, Wren. I need you to believe that. Bane found the stone in my trunk. My own trunk. Bane found what he was told to find, in a location he had unsupervised access to for 11 years as your superior. I have already begun pulling that thread. She looked at me then, fully, gray eyes catching what little light there was. Tell me the truth. Not for the record. For me. Did you take anything, ever, from that vault? No, my voice cracked on the single syllable, which embarrassed me more than the accusation itself had. I have never in my life taken something that wasn't mine. My father would come back from wherever he is and disown me himself. I believe you, she said. Simply, no hesitation in it at all, and something in my chest that had been clenched since the guards took me by the arms finally, fractionally, loosened. I reached through the bars again, not for the dog this time. My fingers found hers, ink-stained and cold from the storm outside, and she did not pull away. For a long moment, neither of us moved, the space between the bars the only thing keeping the moment from becoming something neither of us was ready to name yet. I want to touch your face, she said, low, careful, the words costing her something visible. Tell me to stop, and I will. Don't stop, I said, and she reached through the gap and laid her palm along my jaw, thumb tracing once beneath my eye where the tears had dried, and the storm outside chose that exact moment to break fully open, thunder rolling through the stone like the whole palace had been holding its breath along with us. I am going to prove this, she said, withdrawing her hand slowly, reluctantly, tonight, if I have to burn every account in that treasury to do it. You are not staying in this cell 1 hour longer than the law strictly requires, and the moment the law allows it, you are coming back to my wing. And this time, I am not asking Pharaoh to find you a room 3 doors down. Do you understand? Your Majesty, Roswin, she said. When it's just us, in the dark, with my dog howling for you loud enough to wake the kitchens, you may call me Roswin. She was as good as her word. By the following evening, after a day of legal maneuvering I only half understood, and a fully documented chain of custody that proved the trunk search had violated 3 separate statutes governing evidence in Crown proceedings, I was released into the Queen's custody, and this time the room I was given was not 3 doors from her own. It was the one beside it, connected by a private corridor Pharaoh unlocked without comment, her expression, for the first time since we'd met, unmistakably approving. The weeks that followed were the strangest and gentlest of my life. Roswin worked the treasury accounts each morning with the ferocity of a woman closing in on prey, and each evening she set the crown aside, not literally. Though sometimes I thought she wished she could, and became, for an hour or two, simply a woman sharing a meal with someone she had decided to trust. The fig bread appeared on the 3rd evening, unannounced, still warm, and I stared at it long enough that Roswin finally asked what was wrong. "My grandmother used to make this," I said. "I mentioned it once. Weeks ago. In passing, to Pharaoh, I think, not even to you." "I asked the kitchens to try a few things," Roswin said, not quite meeting my eyes, which for a woman who met every other gaze in the palace like a challenge was its own small confession. "You mentioned the chamomile, too. And a book. Something about a cartographer's daughter, a library copy you never finished." She produced the book from beneath a stack of ledgers, worn but whole, and set it on the table between us with the careful precision of someone placing a bid she wasn't certain would be accepted. "You remembered all of that," I said, throat tight. "I remember everything you say to me," she said. "It's an unfortunate side effect of paying attention to someone, a ghost of a smile, rare enough on her that I felt it land somewhere beneath my ribs. I am told it's called listening. I'm out of practice." We traded scars after that, over the following nights, the way the fire traded shadows across the study walls. She showed me the mark on her forearm from the night her mother died, a thin, pale line she'd earned pulling a burning drapery away from the body before the guards arrived, too young and too late to save anyone. I told her about the winter my father died and I'd stood between my younger brother and a landlord's dog rather than let it reach him. The scar on my calf faded now, but never quite gone. She traced it once, careful, asking permission with her eyes before her fingers ever touched, and I told her not to stop, and she didn't, and somewhere in the space between one held breath and the next, she kissed me. It was not the kind of kiss the old stories describe, thunderous and instant. It was slow, deliberate. A question asked and answered at the same unhurried pace she asked everything, her hand cradling my jaw the way it had through prison bars. And when she finally drew back, she rested her forehead against mine and said, "I have been afraid of this for 3 weeks," with the particular helpless honesty of someone confessing to a crime. "Only 3? I am a careful woman, Wren. 3 weeks was fast. For me, we might have stayed there all night, wrapped in firelight and fig bread, and the specific unhurried joy of 2 guarded people finally choosing to be less guarded. If Pharaoh hadn't knocked, breathless, an hour later, with news that scattered the warmth of the evening like a struck match. "Chancellor Voss has gone to the council," Pharaoh said. "With Lady Colt, they're bringing a formal charge, Your Majesty. Not against the girl this time, a hard swallow. Against you. Undue influence. Consorting with a suspect to obstruct the Crown's own investigation. They have a witness. Who?" "Chief Archivist Bain," Pharaoh said, and Roswin's face, in the space of that single sentence, closed like a door slammed shut by wind. The council chamber the next morning held more people than I had ever seen in one room, and every one of them, I understood the moment I crossed the threshold, had already decided what they thought of me. Voss stood at the center of the floor like a man who had waited years to occupy exactly that spot, Sverine at his shoulder in a gown the color of old blood, and Bane beside them both, refusing to meet my eyes, which told me more than any testimony he was about to give. "Your Majesty has taken a suspected thief into her private chambers," Voss said, addressing the assembled council rather than the Queen directly, a calculated insult. "Has shared meals with her, has, by multiple accounts, shared considerably more than meals." I ask the council, how are we to trust an investigation conducted by a woman who has clearly lost all objectivity where the suspect is concerned? "The evidence against Miss Calloway was fabricated," Roswin said, from the dais, her voice carrying without effort to every corner of the room. "The trunk search violated statute. The paste replica has already been traced to a jeweler's workshop that has never done business with this archive, but has, on 3 occasions this year, done business with your office. Chancellor, accusations," Voss said, spreading his hands, the picture of wounded reason. "Where is your proof, Your Majesty? Where is anything beyond a dog's affections and a clerk's convenient theories?" I felt every eye in the room shift to me, and for one long, terrible moment, I understood exactly what it must have felt like for my father, all those years ago, to watch a room full of people decide his honesty was the least believable thing in it. Then I remembered the seam. "I have proof," I said, and my voice, to my own surprise, did not shake. "I've had it since last week. I didn't bring it to Her Majesty because I wanted to be certain of every entry before I said a word that could not be unsaid." I stepped forward, past Voss, past Bane's studied refusal to look at me, and set a folio of pages on the council table. The southern tithe accounts. 11 crates shipped, 10 unloaded, the 11th folded into handling loss under a seal that traces to the Chancellor's private office. The locksmith requisition for the widow's eye case, run 8 days before the theft through the same office, never logged with the archive as procedure requires. And this, I laid the final page down, the one that had cost me 2 sleepless nights to fully trace, a ledger of 6 private sales, over 4 years, of gemstones matching the Crown's registry weights almost exactly, each one recorded as a reset or reappraisal in the Crown's books, and each one, Chancellor, deposited into an account under your late wife's maiden name. The silence that followed had a different quality than any silence I had stood inside before. Voss's face did the thing guilty faces do when they run out of rehearsed lines. It went, very briefly, entirely blank, before he reached for outrage and found it a half-second too late to be convincing. "Fabrication," he said. "This girl has clearly, Chief Archivist Bane," Roswin said, cutting through him with the flat certainty of a woman who had already read the room correctly. "You filed 3 warnings from Miss Calloway on this exact account over the past 2 months and did nothing. You conducted a trunk search in violation of statute. At whose instruction?" Bane's silence lasted 4 seconds. I counted them. "His," Bane finally said. Not looking at Voss, looking instead at the floor, at his own hands, at anything that wasn't the Queen's face. He said it would be handled quietly. He said the girl would be dismissed and the matter closed and no one would look further. Voss moved then, not toward the door, though I think he considered it, but toward me, one hand closing hard on my wrist before Roswin was even fully out of her seat. "You clever, meddling," he did not finish the sentence. Roswin crossed the distance between the dais and the floor faster than I had ever seen her move, and the guard who should have intervened was a half-step too slow, and it was Roswin's own body that took the shove Voss aimed my way in his last useless bid to reach the doors, her shoulder taking the brunt of a blow meant to clear a path through me. She did not go down. She barely staggered. But her hand found mine immediately after, checking, and something in her face when she confirmed I was unhurt looked less like a queen's composure and more like a woman who had just watched her worst fear nearly happen twice in one life. Voss did not reach the doors. 2 guards had him on the floor before he'd crossed 3 steps, and it was Captain Cade, arriving at a dead run with Thistle at his heel, who wrenched Voss's arms behind his back and looked, briefly, disappointed not to have been the one to knock him down himself. "Execute him now," someone in the council called out. I never learned who, and for one cold moment I saw something in Roswin's face that told me she was seriously weighing it. 7 years of grief compressed into a single decision. "No," I said, before I could stop myself, my hand still in hers. "Let the law do it properly. In front of everyone. Let them all watch it be true, not just heard." She looked at me a long moment, gray eyes searching mine, and whatever she found there settled something in her that had been braced for violence. "Take him to the vault tower," she said instead, "and get Lady Colt as well. I believe she has some accounting of her own to do." The trial ran 3 days, and I will not pretend I remember all of it, only the parts that mattered, the forged servant's note in Spherine's own hand, the one meant to place the paste replica in my trunk, produced by a maid too frightened of the queen's wrath to keep protecting a mistress who had never once protected her back. Bain's testimony, delivered in the flat, exhausted voice of a man who had run out of better options, confirming 11 years of quietly filing away every inconvenient truth I had ever handed him. The full ledger of Voss's private sales, 4 years and 6 stones deep, laid out on the council table where every courtier who had once sneered at the guttersnipe clerk could see, in her own careful handwriting, exactly how the truth had finally been proven. The Hall of Ledgers was full again on the day of the public reading, fuller than it had been the day of the accusation, and this time, when I walked its length, it was not under guard. Thistle walked beside me instead, unhurried and absolute, the way she had walked beside the queen for 7 years, and when I reached the dais, Roswin was already standing, waiting, and the crowd that had watched me humiliated 3 months prior went utterly silent as she took my hand in front of every one of them. "This court owes Miss Wren Calloway an accounting," she said, her voice pitched to carry to the last gallery, not an apology alone, an accounting. Chancellor Edric Voss is stripped of title and estate, effective this hour, and remanded to the vault tower for the full term the law allows for treason against the crown's own treasury. Lady Spherian Colt is exiled from court, and from this city, her name struck from every role she has ever held. Chief Archivist Corliss Bain is dismissed without pension and will spend the next 2 years in service to the very archive he failed to protect, under new supervision. A pause, and something in her voice softened without losing an ounce of its authority. And Wren Calloway, who was accused before this court of theft, has instead uncovered the largest fraud committed against this crown in a generation, at considerable personal cost, and with considerably more grace than this court showed her in return. The room that had once called me guttersnipe behind careful hands now watched in a silence that had nothing sneering left in it at all. "I love her," Roswin said, simply, into that silence. No epithet, no royal formality, just the plain fact of it laid down like the last entry in a book long overdue for closing. "I have loved her, I think, since a dog I raised from a pup chose her feet over my own in front of all of you, and had the good sense to know what I did not yet have the courage to admit. I do not intend to lose what's mine twice. I already lost that chance once, 7 years ago, to men exactly like the ones we buried today. She turned to me fully then, in front of the whole assembled court, and her voice dropped low enough that it was, for one heartbeat, only for me. "I want to mark you," she said. "Properly, bond and bite, before witnesses, if you'll have me. But I am asking, Ren, not commanding. You have had enough decided over you without your say these past months to last a lifetime. Tell me to stop, at any point, and I will." "Don't stop," I said, for the second time in my life, and this time the whole Hall of Ledgers heard it. The claiming happened privately that same night, away from the court's eyes, in the small solar where the fire had first warmed both of us into honesty. She asked me twice more before her teeth ever found my scent gland, once with words. Once with the simple pause of her mouth against my throat, waiting, and both times I told her not to stop, and when the bite finally landed it, did not hurt the way I had braced for. It felt like a door opening rather than closing, warmth flooding down through the bond the moment it snapped into place, and for the first time in my life I felt, distinctly and undeniably, someone else's feeling arrive inside my own chest, relief, vast and old and finally unguarded. "I do not lose what's mine twice," she said again, into the bond this time rather than aloud, and I understood, feeling the shape of the vow settle into something permanent between us, that she never intended to test that promise again. A year on, the vault tower still held Voss, older now and stripped of everything that had once made men flinch from him. Svarine's name had not been spoken in the palace in months, exiled to whatever distant estate would still take her. Bane kept the archive's ledgers now with a diligence I doubt he had ever managed before, and though we did not speak often, he no longer refused to meet my eyes. The wedding was small, by Crown standards, small meaning 300 guests instead of 3,000, held in the same Hall of Ledgers where the whole story had begun. Because Roswin had insisted the room deserved a better final entry than the one it had been given. Captain Cade stood as witness and cried, badly, and told anyone who would listen that in 15 years of service he had never once seen his queen wait for a door to open for someone else the way she waited that morning, watching me walk the length of the hall in a gown the color of good ink. Pharaoh wept openly and unashamedly. Thistle wore a collar of the same pale stone as the aisle floor and refused, as ever, to sit anywhere but at my feet. Roswin set the ring on my hand herself, cut from the very heart of the widow's eye, the true stone, recovered whole from a locked drawer in Voss's private study, too valuable and too recognizable for him to have ever safely sold, kept instead as a hostage against the day he might need it as leverage. She had it cut down and reset, small enough for a working clerk's hand, large enough that its history could never be entirely forgotten. "My gutter snipe with a queen's eye for gold," she said at the wedding feast, raising her glass to the very word that had once been thrown at me across the Hall of Ledgers like a stone of its own, and this time the whole room laughed with her, warm instead of cruel, and I understood that the ugliest thing anyone had ever called me now belonged entirely and only to her. We keep the account books together now, some mornings, at the same table where all of it started, her hand occasionally covering mine when the sums run long. Thistle sleeps across both our feet, exactly as she has since the first afternoon she refused to leave my side, unmoved and unmovable, the truest witness either of us ever had. On mornings when the light comes in low and gold across the study floor, I sit at that table and think of my father and the ledger he taught me to keep straight, and I understand now what he could not have known to promise me, that a page kept honest long enough will eventually be read by someone capable of seeing the truth in it. Being seen, I have learned, was never a small thing. It was the only thing. Everything else, the crown, the stone, The dog who chose me before anyone else would was simply the world catching up to what one honest ledger had known all along. The end.